Hello, indoor gardeners, and welcome to another episode of the Indoor Gardener podcast on the Wainwright Broadcasting System. My name is Greg Draiss. I'm your host. If you want to find some really nice little houseplants and tropicals and succulents, please stop by the indoorgarden.etsy.com where you can find really cool plants for cool people. And I got to sell some, folks, because it's a jungle in there. The Indoor Gardener podcast is everything about growing everything indoors. Now that seed starting season is happening, it's March 1st here in the Northeast, but this advice is good for any time of year. We're going to take on another one of those urban legends, one of the magical ingredients that acts as an insecticide, a fungicide, an herbicide, and disease cure, and all these other things. Epsom salts. Epsom salts have been around forever, and they are used for foot soaks and draw out toxins and this and that. And apparently, according to the interweb, they are a magical ingredient for gardening indoors and outdoors. The biggest use outdoors is to supposedly prevent blossom end rot. If you're growing plants that fruit, and you can even grow some of these indoors, if you got an indoor greenhouse, this does qualify for indoor gardening. If you got an indoor greenhouse and you're growing peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, eggplant, squash, etc., like that, and the bottoms of your fruits are turning black, chances are it's a situation that's called blossom end rot. I almost said disease because it's not a disease, it's a physiological problem with the plant. And the number one recommendation for household remedies for that is Epsom salts, because Epsom salts are magnesium. Magnesium helps with uptake of calcium, and blossom end rot is caused by lack of calcium in the soil. Well, no, it's not. In 99.999% of the time, to use a cliche, there's plenty of calcium in the soil. Now, if you're growing in straight pro mix and not adding any compost or any other good fertilizers with bone meal and such like that in them, or another more readily available source of calcium, it may be the issue in container plants. But if you're using a good organic fertilizer, or just throwing in compost or using dirt outside, there's plenty of phosphorus in there. What causes blossom end rot is the plant's inability to use the existing calcium that's already there in the soil. Adding more calcium through Tums, lime, eggshells, or Epsom salts to make whatever calcium is there more readily available for uptake is not going to do anything. The plant cannot use the calcium that's there, and there's a couple reasons for that. The biggest one is uneven watering. Too wet to too dry, to too wet to too dry. Wild fluctuations in watering, especially early in the season. Now, what that does, if the soil's too wet, the plant and everything around it is saturated. And if it's cooler in the springtime, there's no transpiration going on, so there's nothing leaving the top of the leaves to be replaced by what's being sent up by the roots. And of course, if the plant is too dry, the same thing. There's very little transpiration going on, or if there is, there's nothing in the soil to be taken up by the roots to send up. So it's the plant's inability to use the calcium that's already in the soil. Another cause is excess nitrogen. Calcium does not move very readily through plant tissues, and it's only transported by the xylem tissues. That's the tissues, or the veins, for lack of a better term, in the plants that go from the roots to the top of the plant. Kind of like our arteries and blood vessels. Blood flows two ways. Things flow two ways in plants too. And what happens with excess nitrogen is the calcium ends up being deposited into the leaves and doesn't make it to the fruit. So, what about its use for indoor gardening? Chances are it's not going to harm anything, but again, sticking to the facts and knowing that there's millions of new gardeners out there who joined the ranks of gardeners around the world during COVID and are getting online and trying to get as much information as they can. And you're going to find that Epsom salts kills bugs. It doesn't. Epsom salts kills diseases. It doesn't. It's just a source of magnesium and a little bit of sulfur. And if you're already using a fertilizer, a good fertilizer will already have magnesium in it. So it doesn't do any harm, but it certainly doesn't do any good. As a matter of fact, if it's put on too much, you can run into nutrient toxicity with any nutrient that you apply too much to the soil, whether it's a micronutrient or a macronutrient. And if you look at the package of fertilizer, you'll see that magnesium is in very small percentages, where the front of the package will say something like 15, 30, 15 for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You'll see magnesium very low numbers. I mean, sometimes even below 1. So if you it just tells you that it's going to be very easy to over apply. So that's my bit on Epsom salts. It really is not going to do anything for your plants, and if anything, it could hurt them. And if you're growing fruits in a greenhouse and you over apply magnesium, it can run into a problem where it will replace calcium instead of the calcium being taken up to the plant. And the other issue that I have with these home recommendations online is the recommendations very seldom say how much to use. They'll just say, "Oh, mix a little Epsom salts in water or handful in the bottom of the plant or this much or that much." And then they'll say, "Don't use too much," or they'll say, "Use just a little bit." Well, a little bit and too much to me might be a different meaning to you. So, better off avoiding the Epsom salts. And by the way, soaking your feet in Epsom salts in warm water, that's been shown not to do anything either. If you want to find out more about the Epsom salts myth in the garden, you can look up gardenmyths.com. The author of that site is Robert Pavlis. He is a biochemist and horticulturist with a 6-acre botanical garden. He gardens up in Ontario, Canada, and he has over 3,000 plants in his collection. So check out and see what he says about it, and you'll find out that Epsom salts, while it really doesn't hurt, it certainly doesn't help, and you're just, at the end of the day, most likely wasting your time. This has been the Indoor Gardener Podcast with Greg Draiss. You can catch this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor.fm, and pretty soon on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, and Amazon. If you want to stop by and check out my plant shop online, you can do so at theindoorgarden.etsy.com. As well, check out my page on Facebook, The Indoor Garden, as well as Greg's Garden Service and Lawn Care. And you can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and quite a few videos I have up on TikTok. Thanks for listening, and hope to see you again soon.